So the first move I can think of that took me out of my comfort zone, this is when I first got into IT. So basically, this is when I went from working at Advanced Auto to working as a computer ops in a healthcare facility. So basically, this was a big jump because before then, I never had no IT experience. I had some call center experience where basically I'm doing tech support over the phones, but I never had anything that would say or anything that I could say that I was an IT professional yet. So basically, coming from Advanced Auto, if you don't know what Advanced Auto is, basically the car store you go to, you get your oil, you get any kind of maintenance materials for your car. So I was working at Advanced Auto at the time. So basically going from Advanced Auto to getting this first job as a computer operator, that was the first time I became an IT professional. So that was my very first introduction into a real IT organization. So basically it took me out of my comfort zone because, first of all, like I said, it was my first role. So I'm moving to a new environment, new expectations, not knowing what to expect, and not knowing exactly what the role was because I basically applied for this role roughly about maybe 6 months to a year before I got called in. So when I got called, I didn't necessarily remember what I had applied for. So it was a lot of feelings and emotions going through around that time. So basically, like I said, this was my first role, first time in an IT environment. And then once I got the position, I was the first line of defense. So basically, computer ops is real similar to Helpdesk, except for you actually run backups. You do maintenance in the data center. You have little checks you do every so often. But basically, you still on those phones. So basically, once I started working this position, I was the first line of defense for a lot of issues. My main shift was third shift. So one of my issues was, I was the first line of defense. So on third shift, there's no regular IT support team there. So there's no one from networking there. There's no one from desktop there. There's no one from the server team there. There's no one from applications there. So basically, that computer operator, you're the only person there. And then sometimes, in some places, depending on the size of the organization, you may have multiple people working this computer operator role to where you're not alone. Maybe it's a couple of people there on your shift. But basically for me, most of the time on third shift for a good portion of my time there, I was the only one there. And then after a little bit, it was me and a coworker. So basically we were the first line of defense for a lot of the issues that happened overnight. So anything that goes on overnight, computer-wise, server-wise, application-wise, everybody called into that computer operator line. So I was the first line of defense. And then the second thing was, like I said, sometimes I would be the only one on site on third shift. And basically, if this is your first role and you're the only person on site, a lot of times, that could be nerve-wracking. So I remember when I would come in, my particular position was also called a weekend operator, where I worked the weekend shift on third shift. So basically, I would come in, then the second shift person would be getting ready to leave. And I remember every Friday night, like I said, one of the things I used to do every Friday night was basically I would throw up. I would throw up similar to Jamie Foxx on Any Given Sunday. Time I go in for my shift, I'm in the parking lot, I had to throw up. So I would throw up. Then the next thing was, once I went in and relieved second shift, I would never forget every time second shift would leave, the person on second shift would say, "Hey, you have a good weekend." And that would be the last voice I heard until the next day in the afternoon. So basically, it was nerve-wracking. First line of defense, only person there, and like I said, this was some of the things that it took me out of my comfort zone because before this, like I said, I was working at Advance. Well, basically, your Advance closes around about 9 or 10. So basically, you had plenty of people there. You wasn't the only one there. So basically, like I said, this here is one of the things that took me out of my comfort zone. And then with anything that takes you out of your comfort zone, it has to make you better. So one way that this position made me better was, one of the things was I learned to stay calm and get comfortable working under pressure. Because for me, my biggest fear was, what if I'm the only one there and then everything just goes down or all hell just breaks loose? Well, that was my biggest fear. And a lot of times that's what would happen. So I learned to work under pressure, learned to be comfortable under pressure in that position, because basically once everything starts going haywire, I'm responsible for calling everyone, waking them up, getting the correct people on the phone to fix that issue. So a lot of times I would work there so much and I got so comfortable with the position where I knew everything, where if something was alerting, I was able to be more of a proactive than reactive. So if something was alerting, I knew that, okay, if this continues to alert, I know that this is going to cause this issue and this may be this fix to it. So now, instead of me having to call and wake up someone, sometimes I'm able to go in and resolve the issue myself. So, that helped me to gain confidence. And then also, like I said, I was able to work under pressure and I didn't get all out of whack, as I may say, because, that first time, if you're the only one there and everything goes down, you start to panic. You don't know who to call. When you start to panic, you make mistakes, because even though that issue is going on, you still have to do whatever your other duties is on that shift. So someone that panics, even though that issue is going on and you're panicking about that issue, you start making mistakes in other areas of that particular position. So after a while, you learn to deal with it. You get better with working under pressure. And then the second way that it made me better was basically this position helped me gain a clear understanding of each department and the systems that they manage. So basically saying this, every issue that came in, if it happened on third shift, then basically I would either put in a ticket for it and send it to the correct team, or I would call someone on the correct team. So after a couple of years, I was probably on third shift or in this position for roughly about 4 or 5 years. So basically, after a couple of years, you start to learn what every team does, what every department manages, the systems that they use, the applications that they use. So it helped me develop a clear understanding of what each department did. And then it also helped me develop a clear understanding of the different positions for each department. Like you often hear me say that if you're going for networking, look for those entry-level networking roles, a network technician, a network administrator, a network analyst. Same thing for the server side, same thing for cyber side or security side of things. So in this position, it helped me realize that hierarchy where, okay, the entry level may be a technician or administrator or an analyst. That's usually 1 to 3 years of experience. Then from there, you have your engineer for most teams. And then you have your senior engineer, which would be the highest. And then some of them may even go a little bit higher and call it an architect. So this is where I learned that trajectory there. I learned that hierarchy of the job. So working in this one position helped me to understand all of those things. And then the last thing, or the last way that it made me better, was basically it helped me develop my troubleshooting skills. So in this position, I was able to go out on the floors. If there was any kind of computer issues, I could go look at the PC. I wasn't necessarily in desktop, but like I said, on the first line of defense. So I can go out, try to troubleshoot it before I call someone. Because when you call someone, especially if you're calling someone and waking them up, you want to make sure you done did everything in your power to try to resolve their issue. So you don't want to call somebody, wake them up, and they have to drive. If it's desktop, they have to drive all the way to that location, and they get to that location and it ain't plugged up. Or they get to that location and just do a reboot and it fixes the issue. So like I said, you want to try to exhaust all your resources before calling someone. So in this position, I learned to get real good at troubleshooting. Well, I say real good, but no one can ever really say you're real good at troubleshooting, because you see all kind of issues. So I got pretty decent at it, to where I was able to troubleshoot some networking issues, where for networking issues, it was simple stuff as in, oh, it's not getting an IP address. Then basically from my position, I couldn't do nothing with that. So, okay. But I was able to spot out those issues, able to get used to or familiar with troubleshooting application issues, able to get familiar with troubleshooting PC issues. So like I said, all of this kind of helped me out in the long run. But basically, this were the ways that it made me better from getting out of my comfort zone and making that move from advanced auto into my first IT position as a computer operator. So the second move that took me out of my comfort zone was when I moved from Helpdesk to desktop. So basically my trajectory went from advanced auto, computer operator, Helpdesk, then desktop. But that move from Helpdesk to desktop, it took me out of my comfort zone again. So basically, some of the ways it took me out of that comfort zone was before moving to desktop, I was basically just answering the phones, handling tickets, sending them to different teams, fixing issues remote. You know, I didn't really have to go out on the floor or anything. So basically, just taking phone calls all day, you know, and distributing those tickets to the correct team to look at those issues, or maybe if it's an issue I can fix, then I'm able to do that. So I got pretty comfortable doing that again. So the main thing is, like I said, a lot of times you'll get comfortable in a lot of your different positions. So it's hard to get uncomfortable. But a lot of times that's when that growth ended up happening. So basically in this position, I went from answering the phones to more hands-on troubleshooting. And then from going to desktop, you know, there was some points in times where you may have to repair a PC, you know, so I'm going from where I didn't have much experience repairing PCs other than my own PC, which was basically, you know, changing out a disk drive or, you know, adding a hard drive, different things of that nature, some most simple stuff. But sometimes in desktop, you know, you may have to build a PC out of nothing, you know, take some spare parts, build a PC. Or you may have a laptop that the screen breaks. You know, you need to replace the screen on it because you may not have the same laptop to get a person. So basically, I went from talking on those phones to now more hands-on. Now, don't get me wrong, going to this position, this is the first position or the first time in the IT industry where I liked what I was doing. You know, computer ops, I didn't like it. Like I said, I wanted to quit every day. Helpdesk, I didn't like it because I was still on those phones. So basically when I went to desktop, this is when I started to say I love my job. So I love desktop. You know, desktop was my first love. So if desktop was paying that bread, or if I could make it on desktop, I'd probably still be in desktop. That's how much I love desktop. But like I said, desktop, I went from answering the phones to now on more hands-on, began to go a little bit deeper in repairing PCs and configuring PCs. And then also at desktop, this is where I learned to activate ports. So by activating ports, basically what I mean is, you know, you have a user who's in their office and they got their PC. You know, their PC plugs up into the wall jack. From the wall jack, the other side of the wall jack, it runs to the networking closet. From the networking closet, runs into a patch panel. And then someone has to physically go inside that patch panel, take your networking cable, plug it into the correct port on the patch panel that connects it back to that PC in the desk, and then take that in and go into your switch. So basically, before moving to desktop, I had no idea how to do this. But one of the things that at the position I was at, you know, we was responsible for activating ports. So I was able to learn about that, able to get more familiar with where the networking closets and everything was at my organization. So like I said, but this here was all getting out of my comfort zone. So I didn't really think that, okay, I can do it at the time because like I said, I was in Helpdesk. You know, I'm comfortable in Helpdesk. So, you know, I can only imagine everything looks scary before you get into it. You know, outside looking in, I'm still looking at, I got to call these guys for a computer in an ER or something goes down. These guys got to go and fix it. So I'm still looking at that from that perspective. So, but a lot of this stuff that we had to do, it took me out of my comfort zone. And then moving on to how this move made me better. So basically, one way this move made me better was now I went from working on smaller teams to now at desktop, we had a fairly, I would say, mid-sized team. So there was probably roughly close to about 7 to 10 people there. So basically, we had a pretty good team. And by having this team atmosphere, you're able to learn different things from each team member. So I went there as a sponge. You know, I was soaking up all the information from everyone. You know, you're going to have certain team members that's good at certain applications. You got certain team members that does this particular thing. So I was able to learn from all of them, and hopefully they learned something from me. But basically, like I said, at this position, with that large team, I was able to soak up some game from a little bit of everyone. And another way this made me better was that at the same time in desktop, I'm learning from my team members, but also in desktop, I was able to work more closely with other teams to resolve issues. So if it was an issue someone from networking was working on and they needed a desktop resource, then like I said, I was able to work with that networking person. So I'm able to kind of get familiar with everyone in the other departments, because before this, basically I haven't ever seen too many people in those other departments by face, because most of the time I'm calling them on third shift. So I'm calling them, they at home unless they have to come in, but I'm calling them even when you're on Helpdesk, you're still calling them. So before then, a lot of people I didn't recognize by face. I knew a lot of people by name, but I didn't know them by face. So this got me to work with more of those teams and more of those administrators, engineers, just to help them resolve their issues, any issues that they may have had that needed someone from desktop. And then another way that this made me better was it expanded my technical knowledge, and I became more proficient and more confident at problem solving, because you have a different set of issues when you're in desktop than when I was in Helpdesk. So, you have more urgent issues in desktop, because usually the person from Helpdesk is the one calling the people from desktop for any kind of urgent issues. So basically I got more confident in this. And then also, like I said, I became a little bit better at problem solving again.